Okay, so we've got our front tarp on, and now we're back on the side of the load where we were demonstrating. The rear tarp was already tucked up completely, so we just need to do the front tarp. It's good to pre-stage some equipment around. As you're getting ready to spread your tarps out, put some bungees at strategic locations around the trailer so they're ready to go. And once you get your tarps set to the point where you're not going to throw your bungees off by tucking the sides up, then you can take a handful of bungees and just head down the side and hook one on each D-ring. Okay, now we can go ahead and start fastening up the tarp, but you want to make sure that you don't do too much work on one side of the tarp before you go and do some work on the other side. You got to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. If you put all that bungee pressure on one side of the tarp, it'll actually pull the tarp off center. And an off-center tarp, it looks bad, and it's also much more difficult to work with. If your tarps are straight on the load, once you figure out a system to do with your bungees, you can pretty much do the same system all the way down the side. You can do that at intervals, skip a little space, and then remember that rub rail technique. Find the rub rail of the trailer and take a pinch of the tarp right there, and then take the rest of your tarp and tuck it up underneath, and then where you had that pinch will come down to the deck of the trailer and make a nice seal for you there. And then again, my preference is to hook bungees to the trailer whenever I can. So that means I'm going to hook up and get my first segment going and do a push and a pull at the same time. If you just try to pull on this, you're not going to get as much tension, and it's really hard on the bungees right there. So you want to push and pull at the same time so you get the tension on that first part that you start with, and then we can find a place to hook to the trailer. Now there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I think on this one I'm going to come underneath this spool and come back to this stake pocket. And hooking on the bottom of that pocket might seem kind of sketchy, but as long as that has tension on it, it'll never come off of there. Now I'm going to skip a segment again. Again, find that rub rail. And when I make my tuck this time, I'm going to pull backwards on it to try to take the wrinkles out of that fabric to the front. And we're ready for our next bungee. Now on this one, I'm going to demonstrate a different way. Although this is a bad location because we've got our turn signal light right here, so we want to be cautious about that not covering up that light. So I'm just going to go to this pocket here, up through the ring, and back down to the back side of this pocket. You want to be cautious about the stake pockets. The pockets are sharp, so if there's any movement there, it'll actually cut your bungee. Now we can go all the way to the end. Again, that technique where with my hand that's able to go away from the trailer, I'm going to grab here, split the difference to the bottom of the tarp, and pull out with this hand and pull back toward me and up with this hand, and that'll go up in there. So pull back, takes the wrinkles out, and pull it up, and you can do 8-10 feet of tarp at the same time with that, depending on how much you've got to tuck up. I've got a tensioner here already holding some tension on, so we can also put one down lower here, or the rear tarp, the corner is hard to keep track of sometimes. So here what I could do is come around this bungee, or around this spool right here and back, so we've got some control on that. We better not do any more here. It's time to go to the other side. On the other side of this load, we were demonstrating having the rear tarp completely finished and then putting the front tarp over the top of it. On this side, I've left it the other way, so both tarps are actually hanging down. We've got our rear tarp is underneath and the front tarp is over the top. So that makes the process of getting them tucked up and getting it to be neat and flat on the side more difficult. So sometimes what you can do is kind of start toward the middle of your tarp and get them both tucked up a little bit. So again, I can do that pinch and try to get both of the tarps pinched and go down here and gather them up and put that in there. And again, that pre-staged bungee that's ready to go is critical. I'm just going to do a temporary thing with this one just to hold that up while I go and get the rest of this tucked up. Anytime you switch from one method of folding, tucking, to a different method, that fabric is going to wrinkle in there, so you're going to have a bulge in the side of your tarp. So anytime you can keep the same kind of fold going, that's going to be a better option for you. It can be difficult when you're doing two tarps at the same time. With a little practice, you can make it work. Now that we've got tension on the other side of the tarp, we can actually go ahead and finish up this side of the tarp completely. If the doubling back technique isn't working, then you might have to switch to a different style. Keep in mind, in our equipment, a lot of times we have 21-inch bungees and 31-inch bungees, so depending on which one you have, your options are going to be different. So this one, it's not going to work, so I can just maybe go underneath to that strap rail. Keep in mind, once you do this, you won't be able to slide a winch past that spot, and sometimes in the winter, this is not such a great thing. You get snow and ice on that underneath there. Depending on what your spacing is here, how tall your load is, and what the shape of your tarp is, that's going to create a lot of different situations to do a lot of different things with your bungees. Sometimes you can double back. Anytime you go on the outside of the rail, then you're risking, if you bump up against something, you could turn your tarp loose. So I like to try to keep things inside the rail whenever I can, but it's not always possible to do that. So that's this side pretty much complete on the bottom part here. Then you want to take a look and see how the top part of your tarp is, if there's any loose segments up there that need a little extra help. Now that we've stepped away from the load, and that's an important thing, look at your load from a distance and make sure that it still makes sense. We can see that we've got a low section up on the top there where that tarp is probably going to want to flutter in the wind a little bit. So we can fix that using our winch bar technique. Again, we can go put some bungees on that top row of D-rings and pull some down pressure on that. Okay, now we just got to finish up the other side. Okay, I think we got it pretty well buttoned up now. Remember, every load is a little bit different, and remember, if you spend extra time in the beginning getting your tarps on square and straight, centered side to side and front to back, it's going to make your job a whole lot easier. Spend a few extra minutes in the beginning and you'll actually save time in the end. When you take off down the road, don't forget to do your load checks like you're required to do, and checking your tarps is part of that load check situation. If you see something loose and flapping, make sure you stop and check it and make changes as necessary, because the tarps don't flap in the wind for more than just a few minutes before it starts to cause damage that is very difficult to repair. A little extra time spent padding sharp edges. This load wasn't too bad, but we'll cover that more in upcoming segments. The little attention to detail makes a huge difference, and then you got something you can be proud of while you're rolling down the road.